Much, Declan.
Now you're ready.
Thank you, Declan. And good morning, everybody. Hope you're all keeping well, and nice to get the opportunity to talk to you again. We have a fair bit to cover off in the 45 minutes that we have in front of us, so I'm gonna dive straight in if that's all right. But just to explain what I'm gonna do for about, I suppose, probably about 30 minutes of the 45. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take you through the mock paper, okay, and give you some idea if this were the real paper how you might go about answering the questions that were on the mock paper, which I sent out to you, and hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at. If you didn't get a chance to have a look at, there's no need to panic on that either. This will still be useful. Okay. Um, so I'm going to do that for about 30 minutes. Then I'm going to put the mock paper away, and I'm going to take out the real paper. Only I'm going to be able to see it, but I will give you some pointers as to what to focus on, and we'll give you a couple of topics to leave out. Okay, that you don't need to focus on ahead of the main exam. Okay, and then we'll hopefully have a few minutes at the end for a couple of questions. All right. All right, so hopefully that sounds good. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to deal with the short questions at all. Okay, what I'm going to do is I have it loaded up and ready to go. I'm going to send you out the answers once this call is over. Okay, well, I do have a law call afterwards, so maybe after that, maybe closer to 1 o'clock. But I will send out the answers to the short questions, and you can read through them and see how you might have gotten on if they were the real ones. So in the interest of time, I'm only going to focus on the long questions for this morning. All right. So we're going to jump straight in. And the first of the long questions, and you have to do three of these in 2 weeks' time. First of the long questions in the mock is outline the benefits for firms engaging in international trade. That's simply, sorry, there's some notes there afterwards. I'm about to read straight into them. Nice short question. Outline the benefits for firms engaging in international trade. And the answer to these questions are on pages 1 to 4 of module one. Okay, so it comes from module one, and the answers are on pages 1 to 4. The most useful information, particularly for this question, is on page 4. Okay. So, what are the benefits to firms in engaging in international trade? Okay. First one is profit opportunities. Okay. So, you have the opportunity, if you're a company, you have the opportunity to make more money. Ireland is a relatively small country. In the entire island, there's only a little bit over kind of 5 million or so of us. If you limit yourself only to that particular market and you manage to sell one of your products to every man, woman, and child on the island, you're still going to sell only 5 million or so of those items, okay? Whereas there are, what, 7, 8 billion people in the world. So you may want to spread your wings a little bit further. If you do, and you are successful in doing it, it's the reason a lot of companies do it, you can expand your market significantly and you can make a lot more money, okay? Um, that's particularly useful when competition in Ireland is particularly high. So maybe at some point, you might have been one of only maybe two companies selling the products. We roll the clock forward maybe 5 years, and now there's 10 people all vying for what is a market share that maybe hasn't grown an awful lot. It can become very crowded and very competitive. So it can be very useful to go internationally based on that. An additional reason why it is beneficial for firms to engage in international trade is increased resource utilization. So I mean, if you take the example, let's just take the example of potatoes, maybe. Okay, so let's say you're selling potatoes and you reach a stage where you've sold as many potatoes as you possibly can within the island of Ireland. Nobody is going to buy a single other one. That stock is all going to rot away and be worthless, okay, unless you can find a way of expanding your customer base. Okay, so if you are in a position to export and you can find a way to make that happen, surplus products that you cannot sell domestically can be shipped abroad and can be sold for profit. Okay. Um, Growth prospects is another one. Okay, so similar to I mentioned this a moment or two ago, when the demand falls or maybe the market starts shrinking in one country, it can still be expanding in another. So you may find that in Ireland, a particular product, the demand for that product is beginning to reduce because maybe people have moved on to another product. Maybe everyone has one, and the product is going to last for maybe 10 years. So there's less need for them to buy more. But you may find that, for instance, if you go over to France, that market is actually still expanding. So that's an opportunity for you to expand your business. Okay. And the final one that I call out is improved business vision. So, I mean, people who set up companies are naturally entrepreneurial. They're naturally ambitious. They want to expand their business. It would make sense. Ireland, again, as I said, it's less than 1% of the global population, and probably significantly less than 1% of the global population. Anyone with an iota of ambition and get up and go and entrepreneurial spirit would probably say, okay, I want to take this, I want to take this global. Okay, so it improves the business vision, and you'll be, your brand will be recognized in a lot more countries. And from a business point of view, it would probably represent some natural progression. So if you're answering this question, what we'd be looking for is, list the reasons why firms might benefit from going international. Explain them in your own words. Okay, so this is probably not the last time I'm going to say this, but this is not a scavenger hunt. Okay, it's a scavenger hunt for the short questions. Okay, there's nothing wrong with kind of doing maybe a bit of copying and pasting from the notes for the short questions. Okay, but for the longer ones, we're not looking for you to find the relevant section and say, there we are. Now there we copy 2 pages worth of notes and we put them into the book, and that's the answer. We're looking for information in your own words. We're looking for you to show that you understand what it is that we're talking about. And we'd be also looking for you to include a couple of examples in each section. Okay. Now you need to, I've called out 4 or 5 different examples there. You've got maybe about 30 minutes to do this question. That gives you 5 or 6 minutes to focus on each point that you're trying to make. So that will give you enough time to maybe include an answer or two. There is another question further down where we're looking for 10 things. So that only gives you maybe a maximum, maybe 3 minutes each. Whether or not you're going to be able to include a detailed example in each of them, I'm not sure. So I suppose, tailor it depending on how much information we're looking for in the period of time that you've got. But ideally, we'd be looking for you to, 1, list give the answer based on the notes. 2, explain and show that you understand the answer in your own words. And then 3, give examples, because the key thing to showing that you understand is to show examples, as I've hopefully done once or twice throughout the answer there. So that's what we're looking for on the first of the long questions. Are there any questions on that? Super. Okay. So we'll move on to question 2. So question 2, we're still on module 1 here. Okay. So question 2 is explain the risks in international business and what you can do to minimize them. Okay. The answer to this question are on pages 23, 24, and 25 of module 1. And we also come back to it in a bit more detail on the last 10 or 12 pages of module 3. Okay, we touch on this again, and we talk about, we do more than touch on it. We talk about it again in more detail in module 3. So pages 23, 24, and 25 of module 1, and then also the last 10, 12 pages of module 3. That's where you'll find the answer to it. And there's 4 points there. So you'd maybe want to spend 7 minutes or so writing up on each of these. Okay, so the 4 ones, I'll just call them out and then I'll go into a bit of detail as to what they are. The 4 risks that you're looking out for if you're going to go internationally are 1, country risk, 2, currency risk, 3, commercial risk, and 4, cross-cultural risk. Okay. So what are each of these? So country risk, quite simply, is things like how safe is the country to do business in? Okay. Can your contracts be enforced legally? Are you trying to do business in a country where the governments change maybe 2 or 3 times a year? Are you trying to do business in a country where when the government changes, there is a risk of violence, looting? If they're going to burn down shops, they may choose your shop or your factory or your warehouse to burn it down. You need to keep this in mind if you're going to invest in that country. Okay. How powerful are the unions in the country? Okay. Can you easily make changes to your business and ask people to do different types of work, or will you have to consult with unions before doing that? How is the infrastructure? Are the roads good? Is the broadband good? Things like that. So those are the type of things you're asking yourself in terms of country risk. Okay, because you need to ask yourself, is this an investment that I want to make? You need to keep in mind currency risk. Okay, so you have currency risk. Okay, when you are dealing with countries that have a different currency to you, the value of those currencies may go up and down. Okay, most of us anyway are in the business of credit management, and that would involve selling a product or service now and potentially collecting the money in maybe 90 days time. you can be virtually certain that let's say you're dealing with dollars, you can be virtually certain that the exchange rate between euro and dollars are going to be different in 90 days' time than they are today. They might be up, they might be down, they might be only up or down slightly, but they're almost certainly going to be different to what they are today. So you need to keep that in mind. That's not a challenge that you have if you're selling to a customer in Galway. Okay. You need to keep in mind commercial risk. Okay, so commercial risk is whether or not you have employed the right tactics. Have you put the right management team in place? Are you targeting the right customers? Are you pricing your products correctly? Are you marketing it correctly? Those type of questions. So you need to ask yourself that. That is the third risk. So that applies domestically as well as internationally, but it is exasperated. If you get it wrong, the problems are multiplied if you're dealing internationally. It may not be so easy to fire your management team if they're the wrong ones. It may not be so easy to change the price. Okay, there may be some form of price fixing even in the country that you're doing business in. So you need to keep that in mind when you're going international. And then the fourth and final one is cross-cultural risk. Okay, so cross-cultural risk, which we deal with a lot in Module 2 and Module 3, is the risk of misunderstandings arising from differences in language, lifestyles, mindsets, customs, and religion. Okay, so it's we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in a minute because it relates to another question. But cross-cultural is where you're struggling to align with your customers because they essentially see the world quite differently to the way you do, and they have different customs and different beliefs and different mindsets to maybe the ones you do, and as a result, you have a clash. Okay. Okay. So that's what we're looking for. That's the type of stuff we're looking for in module 2. Again, stay away from lift and shift from the notes, and then examples to show that you understand what it is that you're talking about. Any questions on that one?
Paul, it's three questions from section B. So again, can we prepare these and then tailor them to whatever the question is going to come up?
Very good question. Short answer, yes. I would take the approach, and it's guidance that I sometimes remember to give and sometimes I forget on these sessions. But you know the way if you're going for an interview, okay? If you're going for an interview, you don't just kind of walk into the building and you kind of say, all right, here I am now. What questions do you want to ask? In your head, certainly in my head anyway, for 2 or 3 days beforehand, I'm kind of saying, okay, if they ask me about my strengths, what am I going to say? If they ask me about my weaknesses, what am I going to say? They ask me to give an example of when I had a challenge at work, what am I going to say? So I would prepare like that, okay? Because we're going to give you a good indication. You don't have it yet, but we're going to give you a good indication at the end of the session of what might be coming up. And yes, I would certainly it might well be time well spent to prepare some of that information and say, okay, if let's assume that question comes up, that's what I'm going to say. Let's assume that question comes up, that's what I'm going to say. And then, as you say, tailor it. Now, it is important to answer the question asked. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is important. But very good question. And yes, I think it would be you certainly could do that. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so let me see. So that was question one. That was question 2. We move on to question 3, and we're now getting into module 2, if I remember correctly. If I just find the right place. We are, yeah. Okay, so question 3 is, and this comes from module 2 and most of module 3, what are the factors to take into account when dealing with people in different countries? Okay, so between Module 2 and Module 3, we have given you details of what it's like to do business in 20 of the biggest economies in the world, okay? And we have broken it down into individual sections, okay? And okay, there's not an exact template and formula throughout, but it's very, very close to the following topics.
Sorry, I think I've lost you.
Bowing is the right way to greet people. In some cases, it's hugging. Okay.
Sorry, Paul.
We just keep losing you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I dropped there for a minute today.
You did. Yeah.
Okay. Let me go back. If needs be, I'll log off and log on again. But let me just see. That may not be necessary. Let me just see. Okay, so just going back. So question 3 comes from module 2 and most of module 3, okay? And the topics that and the question is, what are the main factors to take into account when dealing with people in different countries, okay? And in module 2 and module 3, we have details on 20 of the largest economies in the world. Okay, but they have been broken up into various sections, and we talk about each the way to handle each of these categories in each of the 20 different countries. Okay, so this is some of the information that we're looking for you to share back with us in this question. So the first of the items that are on there is greetings. Okay, so greetings are different in each country. Some cases it's handshakes, some cases it's kisses on the cheek, some cases it's bowing, and in some cases it may be hugging. Okay, so you need to ideally you would get that right when you go to the country that you are going to engage in business in. So we want you to talk about greetings. So first, the answer to the first part of the question is greetings, and then explain and say, okay, what different types of greetings? What are we talking about? So maybe give some examples. In these countries, it'd be handshakes. These countries would be kisses on the cheek. These countries would be bowing, and so on. Okay. And you could also talk about how casual or formal the introductions may be. In some countries, you'll just get chatting to the person next to you in a meeting. In other countries, the most senior person will be introduced first, and then they'll work their way down. Okay, they may introduce themselves, or they may be introduced by somebody else. Okay, but you do want to get that right. You get it wrong, you're off to a bad start. We're going to talk about basic etiquettes, the do's and don'ts of the country. Okay, so you're doing business in a new country. What is it you need to keep in mind? Of what are topics to avoid? There are topics to avoid in every country. Okay. We're going to talk. You'd want to talk about verbal communication. Okay, so how you talk to people, how fast you talk, how slow you talk, your tone of your voice, the how loud or soft your voice might be. That will differ from country to country, and you may want to. That may be a difficult thing to change if you're the person doing it, but at the very least, you want to be aware of it so that you might be able to adjust your style, and also you need to be ready for it, and you know that the person talking back to you may be using a soft tone or maybe a loud tone or so on. Non-verbal communication is the next one. Okay, so personal distance is a big one. In some countries, people will be right in on top of you, and that would be their normal way of operating. In other countries, if you're right in on top of somebody and you're in their personal space, they will find it very off-putting, and they'll say, "Oh, I really don't want to do business with this person because he or she is going to be in my personal space the entire time, every time I meet them." Okay, so you want to be aware of that. Again, not easy to change, but you want to at the very least be aware of it. You want to say how to conduct meetings. Okay. Are the meetings going to start on time? Are they going to be late? Is it immediately straight down to business? Or is there an element of getting to know people before you start proceeding in a meeting? In the notes, there's also discussions on how to do phone calls and how to collect money in the country. And then also how to manage your relationships. Okay. So in some countries, the meeting will be over and everyone goes their separate ways. In other countries, it is vital to go for a drink afterwards or dinner afterwards, or maybe even meet the family at the weekend and go for a barbecue or something like that, in order to build relationships, and you may not be able to progress business-wise on that. So what are the main factors to take into account? Greetings, do's and don'ts, verbal communication, non-verbal communication, meetings, phone calls, collecting money, and relationships. Okay, so list those, explain them, and give a couple of examples. There are lots of examples in the notes. Ideally, be giving examples that are your own, though. Okay. That's the type of stuff we're looking for question 3. Any questions on that? Okay, we'll move swiftly on. So number 4, this is a more specific one. Okay, so question 3 was general. This one's more specific. Question 4 is, what are the main differences on how a meeting should be conducted in 5 countries of your choice? So this one, you're going to be doing some comparing and contrasting. Okay, so in France, it'll be like this. In the US, it'll be like that. In Italy, it'll be like that. So you're going to focus in on 5 countries. Okay. And we're going to be talking about how you conduct a meeting in these 5 countries. So again, there are subcategories under how to conduct a meeting. The first one is punctuality. Okay, if the meeting is due to start at 9 o'clock and you turn up at 9:02, in some countries they'll already be well underway at 9:02. In other countries, even at 9:02, you might be there on your own. Okay, and you might still be there on your own at 10 past. Okay. How formal or casual are the meetings? Okay, so again, as I mentioned earlier, is it a case to sit down, quick handshake with the person next to you, and then talk away, or would it be appropriate to wait to be introduced, and for the most senior people to start and then work their way down the organizational chart? How to handle greetings and introductions. So just mentioned that. How to handle business cards is another one. So that may, there's less of it now than there would have been maybe 20, 30 years ago. But how to handle business cards. If you're going to get a business card at a meeting, is a good place, place you are likely to get one. How to handle small talk. So, I mean, is it a case of at 9:02 you should be already down to a discussion on pricing? Might be a slight exaggeration, but it's possible. Or is it a case of, well, no, if the meeting starts at 9 o'clock, you wouldn't talk about anything businessy like until maybe 10 o'clock, or maybe even in some cultures, you wouldn't even discuss business in the first meeting. It might be the second or third meeting before you'd even get on to any sort of let's talk about you spending money with me type thing. If you do that too early, people are going to, in the wrong cultures, they are likely to take offense. How you should introduce yourself, how forthcoming you should be with your successes. I mean, if you're in the US and you don't share that you have kind of won this or won that or been awarded this or awarded that, you may not be asked. Okay, they might expect you to kind of say, "Yeah, my name is Paul Daly, and kind of I'm running a company worth $5 billion." That would be fairly normal in kind of introductions if you get talking to people in the US. If in other cultures, that would be seen automatically as bragging and immediately off-putting. And then the final thing, which is common in meetings, is you may have disagreements and you may have objections. So what are the best ways to handle that? Will people be very clear on their objections? If we take the US, yes, they will be in the US. But if you take, as another example, maybe Saudi Arabia, which is a question in one of the short tests, they may be less direct, and they might sound like they might agree, but in reality, they don't. Okay, so you need to be aware of that, because otherwise you'll leave the meeting with your colleagues from Saudi Arabia and you might say, "Oh, great, we have a deal done," and in reality you don't. Okay. So those are the different kind of types of categories you can have. So you can kind of decide yourself as to which way you might want to answer, because we've mentioned use 5 countries of your choice. You can either do 5 longish paragraphs and say, "This is my discussion on France, this is my discussion on the US, this is my discussion on Germany," or whatever. Or you can take it by category and you can say, "Okay, under the category of punctuality, this would happen in France, this would happen in Germany, this would happen in the US," and do it that way. You can kind of choose. I've seen this question before on the real exam. It's certainly not uncommon to the real exam. I've seen people do both of them fairly successfully. So you can decide yourself which way you'd like to go. Any questions on any of that? Okay, so I mean, those are 2 relatively straightforward. I mean, there's a bit of writing in them, all right. I mean, because you could go on for a bit, but those are 2 relatively straightforward questions that you could certainly easily top. Even if you've come to the end of the course and you've said, "Oh, I'm not too sure international credit management is kind of a topic for me," those 2 questions there are a fairly straightforward one. Okay. And certainly if you've traveled or worked with people from other countries, a lot of it in the notes would ring a bell. Okay. So unless there's any questions, I'm going to move on to question 5. Question 5 is write a note on 10 separate risk criteria to be included in your operational risk model. Now, I'm just going to pause there for a minute and just call out something I've noticed before when we've asked this question in exams. It is important, just read that question carefully. I'll just call it out again. It's write a note on 10 separate risk criteria to be included in your operational risk model. Okay, so it's talking about your operational risk model. That's different to the question that we had earlier, which was about country risk. Well, it relates to country risk, but it's not the question that we had earlier, which talks about currency risk, cross-cultural risk, and commercial risk. It zeroes in specifically on the topic of country risk. This is, country risk, as we mentioned in question 2, is calling out the type of risks that you would have. This is how you talk. This is what you need to prepare for. This is a subcategory of that section. Okay, so it's just important to kind of differentiate between the 2, because I've sometimes see people, they see the word risk and they say, oh, that's country risk, currency risk, commercial risk, and they answer that question, which is fine, but they're not answering the question that we've asked. We're looking for different details in this, okay? All right, so that's important, okay? Where to find the information for this question, this is covered off in the risk section, which is the second part of Module 3, the last 10, 12 pages or so of Module 3, okay? And you will find the information on pages 3, 4, and 5 in that section, okay? So it'll talk about the 10 different risk criteria. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind when you're going to go international, and you need to ask yourself, okay, how am I going to solve or mitigate for these issues? Okay. Now there's 10 of them in here. Okay. You only have maybe 30 minutes for the question. So you're not going to spend very long. You'll be kind of talking about kind of a line, well, line or two, maybe max 3, I'd say, lines on each of these. Okay. You're not going to be talking paragraph and paragraph. You can give paragraphs, fantastic, and you'll probably score well. But you just need to keep in mind the time that you will have available to you on this. Okay. So just quickly, what are the 10 things? These are the things you need to keep in mind. They could be challenging in the country that you've decided to invest in, and you need to know how to mitigate the risks. Okay. So security. Political stability, so that basically says, okay, are we going to have 3 governments in 1 year? Government effectiveness, so that begins to cover the area of, okay, well, are we likely to have the same government? It's the other way around, actually. Political stability, you might be asking yourself, okay, well, if there's an election, are we likely to see maybe a shift to the left or the shift to the right, which may or may not suit our business? Government effectiveness is, okay, how stable are the governments? Okay, so are they, if a government is in place today, is it still going to be there in 6 months' time? Because if you have countries that have elections 3 times a year, that obviously adds to instability and a bit of turmoil. Legal and regulatory environment. Okay, so can you enforce the contracts that you have worked so hard to get? Macroeconomic risks. Okay, so is the risk of things like devaluation? Foreign trade and payment issues. Okay, very important one, that from a collections point of view, because if you've sold $1 million worth of product to a country and you find out that legally that country can only send $10,000 a day, it's going to take you 100 days to get your $1 million back. Okay. So it's going to be a long time before you're going to be able to get that money back. Foreign trade and payment issues. Labor markets. How powerful are the unions? Financial risks. Okay, so I think that's again things like devaluation. Tax policy, very, very topical at the moment. Okay, so a lot of companies are holding at the moment because they're waiting to see is Donald Trump going to impose tariffs or not, or he has threatened to impose tariffs and or that. Could you just bear with me 1 second? Sorry, I have the phone ringing. Just give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay. So where was I? Tax policy. So very, very topical one at the moment. A lot of companies are holding off because tariffs may or may not be coming if you're going to trade with the US. And then finally, the last thing to keep in mind is the standard local infrastructure. How good are the roads in the country that you're going to be dealing with? How good is the electricity? How good is the broadband? Okay, so these are all things you need to. None of it means that you can't invest in any country. It's possible to do business in pretty much every country of the world, but these are all questions you need to ask before you say, okay, well, is this an investment that is the right thing to do? Or are we maybe better off looking at a different country? Okay, so there's 10 of them. You only have half an hour. That gives you about 3 minutes on each. So obviously what we'd be looking for there would be less than what we'd be looking for in the earlier question, where maybe you're looking to cover off maybe 4 topics. Okay, so I suppose do keep that in mind. But are there any questions on any of that? All of it is in the notes.
Is it 300 to 800 words per answer, or for the whole lot?
That would be per answer.
Per answer, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, just for myself, who is in the north, if I talk about government risk, do you expect me to answer from Ireland or UK?
It could be either, or it could be neither, really.
Yeah.
So I
Do you
mean,
want to say evasive or yeah?
yeah, I mean, government effectiveness. I mean, you could use the example of, okay, let's say you're an Irish company and you want to invest in the north or in or the I'm going to choose my term carefully here, but over in, say, England, Scotland, and Wales,
Yeah.
you could discuss what that'd be like, but it wouldn't be limited to that. So it's not
Right. Okay.
limited to your own government. It would be kind of, well, what government is in place in the US, in France, in China, wherever, Um,
Okay.
and by government, I mean, if you take the example of China, you might kind of use the term government maybe a little bit more loosely, but I mean, by government, we're talking about who's in charge.
Okay.
Yeah. So you could do either, or you could do neither. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Or both. Okay. Any questions? Any further questions on that? No. Okay. So let me see. I won't be doing the last question, which for reasons I'll explain in a minute. But what do we have before? And we have number 6 and number 7 before we get to that. Excuse me. Okay. So number 6, explain with examples the effect that foreign exchange risk can have on transactions over time. These are covered off in pages 7 and 8 of module 3 in the risk section, which specifically relates to currency risk. So explain with examples the effect that foreign exchange risk can have on transactions over time. So I have example here. It's here in the notes. I've added 1 or 2 little additional notes for myself just to that, but I'm going to try and share it just for a moment. It's the only one where I'm going to be sharing, but hopefully you can see. That's the final button. Can you see that yet or not? It's the final button I need to press. Oh, sorry. The one that says share. Sorry. Are you able to see my screen now? You should see black writing and some white. Okay. So just to show examples, I mean, this is in the notes, so you can go back and look at it yourself. And this is the only one where I'm actually going to put stuff up on the screen. But if you just see the example there, what we're looking for here is maybe a couple of examples that you might share in relation to what could happen if currencies change between the time that you sell the product and the time it comes to collect the money. Don't worry about the stuff down from where it says the trigger for these losses. We're just focusing on the bits with the numbers here. But the example that's in the notes says if you agree to buy 1,000 items for $20 each to be delivered next month, if the exchange rate on the US dollar is 91 cents to the is 91 cents to the dollar, the value of the goods in euro is 18,200. Okay, so 91 against the 20,000, that means you will have paid 18,200 euro for your $20,000 worth of goods. Okay. You then add a 5% profit margin and you're going to sell the goods for 19,110. Okay. So that means, that means you're going to make a profit of 910 euro. Okay. All right. So that's the profit you're going to make. So you paid 18,200 for them. You're going to sell them for 19,110. That's the profit you're going to make. However, if you take another scenario where the dollar strengthens and the dollar is now worth 97, the price of the goods is no longer 18,200. It is now 19,400. Okay. Now you're still going to sell your goods for 19,110, and that means you're going to come away with a loss. Okay. So that shows you how important it is to keep in mind what the exchange rate is. Now, there's things you can do to mitigate this, which I'm going to mention now in a minute. But that's an example there. Now, on the more positive one, if the rate falls and the dollar is now only worth 85 cents, 85 cents. If it's 85 cents in euro to the dollar, this was easier when it was pounds, so if it's now 85 cents to the dollar, the cost of the goods is only going to be 1,000. Is only going to be 17,000. Okay, that's what it works out for 20,000 worth of dollars worth of goods. You're going to now pay 17,000. You're still going to sell your goods for 19,110. So you're now looking at an additional profit of 2,110 euro. Okay. So that just shows you. So in one example, the exchange rate is 91. In the second example, the exchange rate is 97. And in the third example, the exchange rate is 85. So if we gave you that type of question, I'll give you a bit more details in a minute as to whether or not we are going to give you that type of question. But if we gave you that type of question, that's the type of examples we'd be looking for. Okay. And there's a couple of things you can do. I'll stop sharing screen now, but there's a couple of things you can do to mitigate that if you are a company. So one of the things you can do is you can indicate, okay, for the purposes of this contract, the US dollar is worth the euro is worth $1.10, for example. Okay, you could just say, okay, for the purposes of this contract, this is the rate that we're going to be charging. Okay, you could get a spot rate for the currency. So you agree with the bank that you're going to that they are going to on a particular day there's going to be a particular rate applied. So it's the bank that takes the hit if they have not hedged their bets in the correct way. Okay, so you can agree with the bank. Okay, on a particular day, we're going to be receiving this amount of money. The exchange rate that's going to be applied is whatever it is going to be. The bank may make a profit on it, they may make a loss on it, but the risk is now with the bank rather than with you. If you're a big company, so certainly the last client that I worked with on the credit collection side had this scenario, you would have a number of different bank accounts. So it doesn't really matter what the exchange rate is on a particular day because you can choose when to move money from account A to account B. You can wait until there's a favorable exchange rate. So in the last time I was working at the credit collection side of things, the company had a euro bank account, a US dollar bank account, a sterling bank account, and a number of others. Okay, so the money just came into that account as was agreed, and if they were going to move it from that account into another account where there may be exchange rate applied, they would wait until there was a particular positive exchange rate and then make the transaction rather than it comes in and I took an almighty haircut. And then the last thing is you can just deal in your own currency. Okay, you can indicate, okay, it's going to be for the purposes of this transaction, we're expecting to receive our money in euro, and that's what you're going to pay me in. Okay, so whatever amount of dollars it costs to buy, to say 20,000 worth of euro, then that's what you're going to pay. It's the customer who will take the risk. Okay. So I'm tight on time, but are there any questions on that? Just for the record, if you have any questions and you either don't get time or you forget about them, I am around for the next 2 weeks, so feel free to use me from that point of view. Drop me an email and say, okay, a little bit unclear on this thing. You said something here and I didn't quite understand it. No problem whatsoever in clarifying it by email if you need me to. Okay. So I'm not going to be doing question 8 because that's on legal systems and we'll be here all day if we do that. So the last one I'm going to cover off, and it's not on the exam either. Okay, so you can write that bit down. It's not legal systems. You cover them off in the second assignment, but you won't be covering them off in the exam. They're not on the paper. Okay, so you can skip the legal systems. That's question 8, so we're not going to be dealing with it. So the last question I am going to deal with is question 7, and the question is: discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the 4 main collection options open to large multinational companies. And this is covered on module 4, and it's covered page 3, 4, 5, and 6 of module 4. Okay, so this is answering the question, okay, so I've set up my business internationally, I'm extending credit, how am I going to do my collections activities? Okay, and there are 4 options that you have. The first one is you can base your collectors in the local country. Okay, so you've decided I'm going to start doing business in France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. You can put a couple or an entire team of collectors in each of those 4 countries, and they will give them a ledger and they will start collecting on that money. Okay. The advantages you have if you do that is there should be good local knowledge. Okay, so if you hire collectors in France, they're either going to be French or they will be people who maybe lived most likely people who lived a long time in France. So they will understand the ways of working in France pretty well. So you will have a good local knowledge. Your scope for customer visits is better than if you're doing it all from Ireland. Okay. So the opportunity for them to get in a car, get in a taxi, get on a train, and go and visit some of your key customers is there. Okay. You're likely to be in a building with other teams who are delivering the business. Okay, so they might be in the same building as the sales team, the marketing teams, the operations team. So the opportunity for meetings and for coffees and lunches and things like that are there. So you can build closer relationships with your colleagues in sales, marketing, operations, and so on, if you have collectors in the local country. And there's less chance of cross-cultural risk. So as I said, good chance these people are going to be French, if we take the example of France, or they've lived there a long time. They're not likely to make some of the basic mistakes that you might make if you've never worked with French customers. Okay. The disadvantages of doing it in a customer's country is it might be slower. You might be slower to transfer knowledge than if you have a shared service model. Okay, so by shared service model, that's going to be the second example. But by that, we would mean, okay, having a setup where maybe all of the collectors are all working in the same building in Dublin. Okay. So the French team are working with the Spanish team, are working with the German team, are working with the Italian team. Okay. So there, if one of them comes up with a good idea, chances are that's going to be shared pretty quickly with the other teams. Okay. That's going to be a lot slower if they're all split between Madrid, Paris, Rome, and Berlin. Okay. There may be less management support. Okay, so a lot of times, certainly in the operations I've worked in, when we have local collectors, there's only maybe one or two of them. So you're not going to have two collectors and then have a collections manager sitting all day, kind of watching what the two collectors are doing. Okay, so you may have less management support. The collectors may be reporting into a finance manager or somebody whose job is not full-time collections or credit. Okay. There can be less IT support. Okay, the IT support systems tend to get more attention when you're dealing with a shared service model where there's maybe 100 people all in the one building rather than when they're scattered all over the place. Rollouts of IT systems and that tend to take a bit longer when they're all scattered. Okay, and there may be less synergy. Okay, they won't see each other much if they're scattered among 4 different countries, whereas if they're all based in Ireland, all in the same building, they will see each other every day. Okay. Shared service model. So, I mean, again, it's kind of, I mean, for that, the answer is kind of nearly the reverse of the first bit. Okay, you get better knowledge sharing. As I said, you get more support from things like management, IT systems, and so on when you're all based in the one place. There's potential cost savings. Okay, you only need one office if you're going to base them all in Ireland. If you're going to have some in Germany, some in Spain, some in Italy, some in France, you're going to need 4 offices and greater team synergy. The downside is the reverse of the positives of what you have when you do base them in the local country. You can't really visit as frequently. You have less chance to build relationships unless you're going to get on a plane and go out to Paris and the other places. Less local knowledge. Okay, so you may have collectors that maybe are not as suited to doing collections in the countries that you would that you're now doing business in, and from that you have an increased chance of cross-cultural risk. Okay. The last 2 options are you can combine the two. So you can have some collectors here centrally. So I'm assuming here in this example, you're an Irish company. You could have some collectors here and then some locally whose job it is to get on the planes, trains, cars, and so on and go and do the visits. So you could do that. You could do that. It gives you a bit more agility and gives you cover for bank holidays and things like that, because the bank holidays in France frequently don't match the bank holidays in Ireland. So you have a bit of cover and you're open for a bit longer. There's less synergy. It can become a bit more us and them, and it's more costly because you have an operation in Dublin and you also have an operation in Paris, Madrid, and so on. Or you can do what my company would love you to do, which is outsource the whole lot. Okay. So you can hand the entire operation over to a company. The company can then do the collection for you. And if you're the person that has bought that service, you just wait and ideally you just wait and see the money come in. Not necessarily as straightforward as that, but that's what you're maybe looking at. Okay. So apologies, that took a little bit longer to get through than I was hoping, but hopefully you have a good sense there. I'm going to cover off in a minute, unless there's any questions, I'm going to cover off what is going to be on the real exam. Hopefully we'll get it done in 5 minutes. Is that all right?
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So just to repeat the structure of the exam, the exam is marked out of 100. Okay. You get 25 marks for the first 10 short questions. Okay, so 2.5 marks for each question, and there's a maximum score there of 25. And then you get 25 marks for each of the 3 longer questions that you're going to do for a total of 100. Okay, we're going to convert that score into 70. Okay, so you got a score out of 70. And then we will add back in 10 marks, a maximum of 10 marks for your first assignment, a maximum of 10 marks for your second assignment, and then 10 more marks for the average that you have among the 4 short tests and that'll give you a final score out of 100. Okay. For the short questions, I'm going to email them to you when the session is over. So I'm straight into the law one now, so it might be after that, but I'll send them on to you. And in terms of the real exam, so this is the important bit, for the longer questions, this is what is potentially coming up. Okay, so there are 8 questions, same as the mock, there are 8 questions. We have 1 question from module 1, and it's very similar to the questions on the mock paper. So have a look at the questions on the mock paper, and if you're able to answer the questions on the mock paper, you will have a good chance of doing a good job at answering a real question on the real exam. Okay, so module 1, first one's from module 1. It's very similar to the question on the mock paper. Okay. Second question that we have is also from module 1, and it relates to the various modes of entry into international business. Okay, so there's a number of pages in module 1 which talks about things like your way of getting into international business. Are you going to do foreign direct investment? Are you going to do franchising? What way are you going to get into the international business? Okay, there's a number of pages on that. That's what the question is about. Question 3 relates to module 2 and module 3. Okay, so these are the top 20 economies that we talked about. Okay, so the first one is discuss how you would approach doing something differently in 5 countries of your choice. So we had an example in the mock one where there were 5 countries of your choice. So I think there we were talking about meetings, if I remember correctly. It'd be something like that. Okay, so it might be how you do your greetings in 5 countries. It might be how you handle objections in 5 countries. It might be how you do your verbal communication in 5 countries. Something like that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about that's what the question is going to ask you. You're going to pick 5 countries, and you're going to say, in these 5 countries, I would handle this particular topic in the following way. Question 4 is again from module 2 and 3, and it's very similar to a question on the mock paper. So we're halfway through the real paper now, because we're on the 4th question, and 2 of the questions are very similar to the questions on the mock paper. So if we cover off module 1, module 2, and module 3, just the questions on the mock paper, you then potentially have a chance of answering 2 questions from the real one. Okay, so that's 2/3 of what you need to do covered already in the mock paper. Okay, so it'd be well worth your while becoming very familiar with the mock paper if you're not already familiar with it. Question 5 again comes from modules 2 and 3, and again this is to discuss how you'd approach something differently in 5 countries of your choice. So we have that for question 3. We have a different version of that question from module 5. Okay, so maybe one is to do with phone calls and one is to do with greetings. One might be to do with verbal communication and the other maybe non-verbal communication. But you know, it's under those. There's not an unlimited number of categories. There's maybe kind of 8 or 10 different categories. So 2 of them are covered off there. And then the one in between, which is module 4, is on the same area, and it's also very similar to the mock paper. So between questions 3, 4, and 5, you know, if you only wanted to focus on those top 20 economies, you could get away with doing that. Now, you'll be limiting yourself in terms of your options. If you see it and you say, oh, I really don't fancy that as a question, you know, you might be a little bit stuck if you haven't looked at module 1 or the later part of module 3 or module 4. But in theory, you could do question 3, question 4, and question 5. All of them are on the top 20 economies, and you're done. Okay, so it's an option for you. You don't have to do it. It's a decision you'll have to make yourself. Okay. Question 6 is from module 3, and it's from the sections that we have after we've finished talking about the top 20 economies. Okay, and it's very similar to one from the mock exam. So that's the 3rd one there. That's very similar to the mock exam. So again, if you're familiar with the mock exam, you're likely to do very well. And then question 7 and question 8 have the same bit of guidance for both. Okay, so there's one module we haven't talked about yet, which is module 4. Okay, so it comes from module 4. Number 7 does, and so does number 8. Okay, they're different questions, but they both come from module 4. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, they are not on the legal systems. Okay, we've covered off the legal systems as part of your assignment, so we're not going to go back to it for the exam. Okay, it's something else. Okay, there's 4 or 5 other categories. 2 of those categories appear in question 7 and question 8 in the real paper. Okay, so that's a lot of information in a short period of time. You might want to do you might want to make use of the recording on this to make sure you have it all right. But that's my guidance for the real exam.
That's great, Paul. Thanks a million. Okay, and we have gone a couple of minutes over. I know a couple of people have joined for the next session. So, any questions to Paul on any of that, or do you want to head off into the sunshine now and then enjoy the day and the summer as long as it lasts? Okay, well,
Thanks, guys.
I'll hit stop here then.